Good evening, everyone. Allison Skaberg here, Consolidated Planning Group, but here tonight we are with the ADDA Association. Lindsay and I were just kind of chatting about that. ADDA or ADA, I guess it just depends on who you talk to on what you call it. But it is the Attention Deficit Disorder Association in the Southern region. It's been around since 1987. Pam Esser is a name that you may have heard, and she's basically the founder of this organization. She founded this organization to provide help and resources to individuals and families that are affected by ADHD, ADD, what have you. So tonight we are excited to have Dr. Lindsay Asawa back with us again. Lindsay and I founded the Fort Bend chapter, I don't even know how many years ago, probably 7 or 8 years ago. Time flies. Yeah, it's been a while. So there was, for a long time, Fort Bend County didn't really have an active chapter. And so Lindsay and I founded that many years ago. And then Lindsay kind of stepped away for a while, and she comes back as a special guest and a special speaker. So if you're joining us for the first time, a couple of things from a housekeeping perspective. Tonight's meeting is being recorded. There will be an email that will go out with the slides, as well as the contact information for myself, as well as Lindsay. And your computer audio and video are muted, so we can't see you or we can't hear you or any kids in the background or anything like that. So you can take a deep breath for that. And so tonight we're going to be talking specifically about ADHD and management and those types of things. We want to hear from you. We want you to put your questions in the chat box. I'm going to be monitoring the chat box, and I'll read those questions out to Lindsay. And if you're planning dinner or planning your evening, just know that we're going to go. We'll be finished on or before 7:30. So if you're planning that way for family, I know we got a house full of kids that are probably waiting on bated breath for you to get off the computer. But anyway, so thanks so much for being here. And one last thing I wanted to mention is when Pam Esser founded this organization, there are other support groups out there for attention deficit, and they're all mandatory that you join, and there's expensive dues and things like that. And Pam's heart was that she wanted people to be able to get tools and resources and not necessarily be waylaid to join or what have you. But as from a person, and just so you know, I'm a volunteer. I'm not like a paid person for this organization or anything like that. And I am a mom and a parent to ADHD. So I live, eat, sleep, and breathe this. But it's only $40 a year as a family to join this organization. And they do have national conferences that come to Houston, big speakers that come from all over across the country that are very, very good. I know Lindsay and I have both attended these conferences in the past. There's a lot of information out there. And also there are chapters all across the state of Texas, not just in Fort Bend County. Our chapter used to meet face-to-face. We used to meet at the Sugarland Baptist Church and their meeting rooms there pre-COVID. And we had a group for kids and we had a group for the parents, so they met at the same time, home 9 yards. But since COVID, we've been meeting by Zoom, and we do not have the kids group right now. So this particular group in Fort Bend County is mainly for parents that have kids with ADHD or ADD, whatever your diagnosis might be. And each month we have a different speaker. It's usually never me. It's always, we always have some other speaker. We might talk about medicine. We might talk about supports in school. We might talk about SSI and Medicaid. Management, there's all kinds of stuff. So we typically meet the last Tuesday of most months. We just say that because it kind of gets a little weird around Thanksgiving and Christmas, but just for planning purposes. And if you've signed up for this one, you'll get an email. We won't spam you. You'll get an email letting you know when the future meetings are, that if you want to register. So thanks so much. And Lindsay, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So let me see if this is working. Okay, so today I want to talk about a subject that's very important to me, which is finding confidence and success with ADHD. I think it's something that a lot of parents ask about when we first give this diagnosis, and something that all of us as parents wonder about. And so I think to me, it's a really, really important topic that I'm really passionate about. And just a quick intro about me. So I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I am co-owner of a practice in Missouri City called Missouri City Family Counseling. And there's 8 of us at our practice that are all licensed mental health professionals. Everyone else at our practice does primarily therapy. And then I am our testing coordinator. So I oversee all of our testing cases. So we actually do a lot of ADHD testing. And it is something that I'm very, very interested in and passionate about. And we also, just so you know, as a resource, we do also offer groups from time to time. We do some social and coping skills groups for kids, and we do teen boys and teen girls groups. And we have just started a new group that is focused on executive functioning skills. And that group is called the Masterminds Group. And we just have been wrapping up our first group, and it's gone very, very well. We're going to continue those groups. And those are really targeting kids with ADHD who are struggling with executive functioning, which all of them are. So let us know if that's something that you are interested in, and we can always add families to the wait list for the next group and then share that information with you.
Can you talk
yes.
about the age groups that you have for these groups, like if it's junior high or high school, and if they meet virtual or in person?
Sure. So our coping and social skills groups, they're called Creative Connections. And those groups, we typically work with kids about 8 to 12. Sometimes we'll see kids a little bit younger, but we found that 8 to 12 age range works really well. And that's both boys and girls. And those groups are always in person at the office, and typically either 6-week groups or 8-week groups. And then the teen boy and teen girls groups, we did switch over to doing those virtually throughout COVID, but we've now transitioned back to doing them in person at the office. And in the past, we always did them in person. And those groups are generally ages, I would say 13 to 17. And we really just group kids according to the ages that we get. So if we get several 13 and 14-year-olds, we'll group them together. And we try to make sure it's age appropriate. And then the executive functioning skills, the Masterminds group is, we're aiming for ages 8 to 12. This current group has ages 10 to 12 in it. It's been a really good age range to work on those executive functioning skills.
And just, you guys might not have this in your practice, but are you aware of any other groups for kids 18 and over? Because a lot of families, we're still having issues. We're still not quite there yet at 18, but we seem to have lacking resources as far as some of these groups. So if you know of any, we certainly would like to know about that.
That's a good question, Allison, because we struggle with that too with a lot of our clients when we're looking for groups. That's an age range that it's hard to find groups. I think Prism Center I think it's in Bel Air, they do have some groups for young adults. There's also, I believe the Solace Center in Siena, there's 2 locations for Solace Center. The one in Siena does offer occasional groups for young adults. Or just adults in general. So there's a couple of places, but it's definitely harder to find in that age range. And we've thought about starting groups for that age range as well. And so we can definitely let you know if we do.
And I just actually, you mentioned the Prism Center, and I will say that I've heard some pretty positive feedback about the Prism Center in the last couple of weeks for a family 18 plus that went through that program. I think it was like an intensive outpatient program, and they had positive things to say. So that may be something that if that's you and you're in that category, you may want to check into that. I do know that it's in Houston, and it's always nice to hear that you hear something positive about some of those things.
I agree. And I've heard a lot of good things about them. So feel free, I have my contact information up here. If anybody has questions or needs ideas or resources, that's part of my job with our practice, is just kind of reaching out to the community and sharing ideas and resources. So feel free to contact me. So on to this topic for today. One thing I want to say before I start is that I know this topic both professionally from years and years of working with kids with ADHD and diagnosing them and treating them, but also personally, I have 3 kids. My kids are 7, 9, and 12. And 2 out of the 3 have ADHD diagnoses. And so I definitely am dealing with this personally as well. And I know the struggles that you're all going through as parents, and I'm living that every day. And so I'm also giving you this advice, both from my experience as a professional and as a parent. So these are the 4 things that I wanted to talk about. First, I want to tell you a little bit about some of the mental health outcomes that we know about that are associated with having a diagnosis of ADHD. And this is why it's so important to work on building confidence because of those mental health outcomes. And then I know you're going to be interested in what predicts good outcomes for our kids, what predicts their success, and how can we use that information to apply that to our own kids. And then what are just some general tips for helping to build their confidence over the years? And then at the end, I just wanted to talk about a couple of success stories, just to give you some examples of some positive outcomes that can happen. So just a little bit of information about some of the mental health outcomes. And I don't mean to be really negative and to scare everybody, but just there's a lot of research on this, that there are kids with ADHD diagnosis are at higher risk for developing anxiety, for developing mood disorders, and untreated ADHD is associated with risk of substance abuse as well. And so there's these couple of studies that I put up here, and these were both large studies, and there have been lots of others, but they all kind of show the same thing: increased risks of depression, anxiety, substance abuse, and also some really risky behaviors like suicidal behaviors and self-harm behaviors. And that can relate to these other diagnoses, as well as the impulsivity that can come along with having ADHD. So this is why we have to take this seriously. I'm only putting this up here to kind of show you that this is a real issue, and it's not just statistics. I do see this every day in the work that I do. It's so extremely common for me to meet with a child for the first time, and make that diagnosis of ADHD, but also determine that there's some anxiety going on as well, or some depression symptoms going on, and especially as they get older. So in teens and adults, that's what we see almost across the board. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but it really is a major issue and something that we need to take seriously. And this is part of the reason for it. This is one reason. So a psychiatrist and a doctor who specializes in ADHD, this is a comment that he made based on his research. So it's estimated that those with ADHD receive 20,000 more negative messages by age 10 than they do positive messages. So that's a big problem. And again, this is something that I hear about every day from the kids and the teens that we work with. There's just so much negativity, unfortunately, and a lot of it is not intentional. People don't intend to bombard them with these negative messages. It's just that they make a lot of mistakes, and they're unintentional mistakes, and we get onto them, right? And teachers get onto them, and we correct them, and we have to point out those mistakes. But unfortunately, it's just unbalanced because there's so much more negative than positive. And what I've seen with the kids that we work with is it chips away and chips away at their self-esteem. They may start out very confident kids from an early age, but that starts to fade over time. And I just see it so often that it's now something I worry about almost more than the ADHD symptoms themselves. I think that the self-esteem issue has become a bigger concern from what I'm seeing across the board. So this is the psychologist who has done lots of research on ADHD, and she wrote this article for Adhd magazine. And I thought this quote was really, really helpful, because she described her own experience with having ADHD. She says, "I remember sitting in my 3rd grade classroom, dancing to a song I was singing in my head," which we all have seen our kids do, "when the teacher turned around and said, 'Emily, sit still, pay attention. Did you take your meds this morning?' I hadn't realized that I wasn't sitting still. I didn't feel like I was misbehaving. All I felt was shame. Looking back on those days, I don't believe that my fidgeting was impeding my ability to learn. It helped me focus. What really hurt me that day was the feeling that I was not okay the way I was, that my natural inclination to move made me frustrating and intolerable. That is the experience for many children with ADHD. And I put this in here to highlight it because this just says it all. I can't tell you how many times I have heard descriptions exactly like this in all the years of evaluating kids with ADHD. That sense of shame, it just is something that pervades everything that they do, because they know that there's things that they can't control about their behavior, and yet they also know that those behaviors are wrong. And so it's kind of this conflict. They don't know what to do about it. They know they're going to make a mistake and they don't know how to stop it. And that just leads to this underlying sense of shame for who they are as people. And it's really hard to watch this happen with kids that are just so fun and vivacious and bright and happy. It's hard to see this start to happen over time and shame start to set in. So knowing that this is a problem, a big problem, I think it's really important for us to pay attention to the research about how we can predict their success and not allow them to start developing those anxiety and depression symptoms and the low self-esteem that we're seeing. So I looked at some of the research. I was really interested in the review studies or the review papers. So they took lots of studies and they reviewed them and basically said, here's what we found. So this first one is a review of 21 studies, all of them looking at resiliency and ADHD. And the 3 factors they found that predicted success in the long term were acceptance by peers. So they needed to have social support. They needed to have some connections with peers. And this is regardless of how well they did in school. So it didn't matter if they were making A's in school or D's in school. As long as they had some peers who accepted them for who they were, some good friends, then that was a predictor of success. The second was positive parenting, which is really helpful to know for all of us. So I think what we need to take away from that is that the way we approach parenting our child really does make a difference in the long term. It will help to determine how successful your child is. And we're not talking about the pushing, the scolding, and I don't mean physically pushing, but figuratively pushing them, scolding them, disciplining them. I don't mean any of that. What this was saying was the positive parenting was what led to success. So the encouragement, the support, the praise, that's what was a predictor. The third, which is really important, was perceived competence. So how did they perceive that they are able to do things, that they have the skills, they have the knowledge, and they can do it? So it's basically confidence. And that was the third major predictor of success. I think that's really, really telling, because what that means is we need to focus a little bit more on increasing their confidence. And you can see that none of these had to do with their ADHD symptoms. So it wasn't about reducing those ADHD symptoms or treating the ADHD symptoms. And that is a part of it. And you'll see that in another study. But what they found was these other factors were more predictive of success. So this actually did focus a little bit more on treatment. This one was a huge review of 127 studies, all of them looking at self-esteem and ADHD. And they found one factor that made a big difference, and it was treatment. So that is the other big component. So untreated ADHD predicted poor long-term self-esteem. And they're specifically looking at self-esteem, right? So, but treatment of ADHD, and that meant any kind. That included treatment with medication, treatment with therapy, any kind of treatment led to improved long-term self-esteem. And so you can probably guess that with treatment comes increased perceived competence, right? Feeling like I can do this, I'm making progress, I'm doing better. And that led to better long-term self-esteem. So treatment is definitely something that we need to make sure that we consider and include. And then this one was interesting. This is the last one that I'll show you, but this is a study where they just interviewed successful adults who have ADHD, and they wanted to see what are some of the things that they felt contributed to their success. So these are the 6 things that came out of those interviews. So they all talked about, many of them talked about their creative thinking and their divergent thinking. So divergent thinking is thinking outside the box rather than thinking inside the box, which we actually know from other research that people with ADHD brains do tend to be more creative and divergent thinkers. So they were saying that that was a big factor that led to their success, which is part of their ADHD brain. Their courage, so they tended to be more risk takers, more willing to put themselves out there and try things and go places and meet people. That was a predictor of success. And that's another factor that was directly related to having an ADHD brain, because that's something we find more often in people with ADHD. And then their energy, again, something directly related to having ADHD, which is both their mental and physical energy. They felt like that actually helped with their long-term success. Their ability to relate to others, so having humor, being able to have a sense of humor about things and have empathy towards others. Again, these are things that other studies have shown many people with ADHD have those strengths. And they're saying that that's a predictor of success. And then they were, another factor was being able to learn how to manage the negative symptoms of ADHD or overcome some of those. So finding strategies and going through treatment and working on ways of managing some of the challenges. And then the last one was, I like that one, it's just a sense of wonder and appreciation. So, and I guess this is also something I think probably many of you guys may relate to when you think about your kids who have ADHD brains. I think they all seem to, across the board, just have that sense of wonder. They kind of just live in the moment. You know, they enjoy life. They are curious. They notice things that other people don't notice. And so those things about them actually may be part of what leads to their long-term success. So these adults are basically saying that all the positive things about having an ADHD brain actually led to their long-term success, as long as they were able to learn how to overcome and manage some of the negatives. So this, I think, was really, really helpful information. So if we then take all of that and then we think about, okay, then how can we build their confidence? If we know it's so important to maintain their confidence over time, then how can we do that? There's a few ways, a few tips that I have. The first starts with you guys. So it starts with just understanding and accepting your child for who they are. That's a really big one. And for me, when I do these evaluations and I give this diagnosis, that's what I focus on first. I really want parents to take that information and just let it sit and try to learn more. You know, research ADHD, learn more about what it means, and understand it better so that you can better help your child. So it means also understanding what the ADHD brain is like. Why are they having these symptoms? What is it that's different about their brain? Because we know it's just a difference in the wiring of an ADHD brain versus a non-ADHD brain. So find out more about what that difference is so that you can better understand it. And then when you do that, then you can choose the right environments for your child. You can say, okay, now that I understand my child's brain and how they learn and how they view the world, then this is a better setting for them than this, or this might be a better coach or teacher for them than this one. So you can start to kind of understand them and work around what they need. And then part of that also is just letting them be who they are sometimes. I think that a lot of what chips away at their self-esteem is we're always trying to fit them into this mold that they don't fit in. You know, we're trying to make them change and be different than they are. And sometimes what makes them feel really good is just letting them be who they are. So if they need to be loud and they need to run around, I know they can't do that all the time, but allow time for that, you know, make time for that and give them opportunities to climb and run and scream and be loud and be social, because that's really good for them. And it's actually a booster for their self-esteem. So the second big thing is actually set them up for success. Don't just hope that it'll happen and wait for it to happen and be sad when they fail. But actually create situations where they are going to be successful, because that is also going to boost their confidence over time. And you can't always do that for them, I know, but while they're young, you can do that. And it's going to improve their confidence, but it's also going to help them learn some skills as they're doing that and as they're being successful. So there's a psychologist who talks about creating islands of competence. And I always use this when I talk to parents. I like that phrase because what he says is that there's a lot of negative things. They're always getting negative feedback. They may not be good at this. They may not be good at that. But as long as there are a few things that they're really good at, those little islands of competence, then that actually acts as a buffer for all the negative. And what you guys have to do as parents is help them find those little islands of competence and then really put lots of attention and support into that. So if they're good at athletics, find a team to get them into and then really support that. Be all in with the whole family. Make sure that they know that that's something you value and you're proud of them for that. Even if they're struggling in school or in other areas, they need to have that. So some parents will ask me sometimes, should I take them out of these other activities so they can focus on their studies? And I say, no, you should not. I think they need those things because that's really something that's going to help maintain their motivation and their confidence and their mood. And then another part of setting them up for success is trying to figure out what are their strengths. And they can help you figure that out. You guys can talk about it together, but what are their strengths? What are they good at? And what are they interested in? And use that information to then think of things that you can get them into. So activities, extracurricular activities or summer camps, or even if you have older kids thinking towards part-time jobs or their future career. You need to base all of that on what is the best fit for them, what are their strengths and what are they interested in, because that's what will set them up for long-term success. I have a good example of this just recently. A kid that I had evaluated years ago, his mom reached out to me just to let me know that he actually did exactly this. They identified his strengths. They decided to really encourage that and let him pursue his areas of interest. And he's now working for Google and he's very successful and he's doing really well and he's really happy. And this is a kid that was almost failing out of college at one point. And so I was so happy to hear that. And she really felt like the key was that they figured out what he really enjoyed and what he was good at. And they really allowed him to pursue that and they encouraged him to pursue it. And that's what did it. Let's see, I'm trying to move something around so I can see better on my screen. There we go. Okay, so then the last one is try to make it a collaborative effort. Try to listen and don't just dictate and tell them what needs to be done because they're more likely to be successful if they're part of the process and they're invested in it rather than you just telling them you need to do this. And that's something that we've found from years of working with, especially teens. Okay, and then these are the two other points as far as building confidence goes. So the peer issue that we talked about earlier, one of those predictors of success was having good peer relationships, a couple of friendships. And so that's something that you really need to focus on and be intentional about it. Try to create those positive experiences with peers, especially if your kids are struggling socially, which a lot of our kids with ADHD are. So make this a priority and help them find, I call it their people. They all have their people. They're out there somewhere, and help them find those people. And it might be through some of those extracurricular activities that you sign them up for. It might be through another parent that you meet that has a child that sounds pretty similar. Maybe you should get them together and do a play date. But actively look for other kids that they are going to connect with and really encourage that and try to plan time in for those relationships and those friendships. And be really.
Can we talk about that a little
ahead.
bit further for
Sure.
older kids too? Because this is a big deal. This is a really, really big deal. And our kids do struggle. They really don't struggle to make friends. They struggle to keep friends. They make the friends. They're friendly. They're outgoing. They make friends, and then they lose them because they have a fuse that's really short and goes from 0 to 100 very quickly. And maybe then they say something mean when they're angry, and then that kind of goes, falls apart. Or B, they lose friendships because they're quote unquote annoying. they talk too much,
You're right.
whatever, they bounce off the walls, whatever. So what about, so we're all trying, play groups when they're younger and things like that. And then it gets even harder and harder the more awkward they feel in the teenage years come. And teenage years are hard for anybody. Like, it doesn't matter if you have ADHD or not. But what about these families that say, okay, well, I've got a teenager, I've got a junior high kid, and quite honestly, we've tried really hard. It's not that we haven't tried, but my kid doesn't have any friends. How do you address that, and how do you take that to the next level?
So I think that's a really good question. And this is a huge issue, especially for teens. I would say one thing to do is that last point under creating positive experiences, which is coach them through the challenges, and start this when they're younger, but continue to do this when they're teens. You be the coach, and as they are having these experiences with their peers, maybe they're making mistakes, maybe something didn't go well that day at school, talk to them about it, talk through it, and help them figure out maybe what could be done differently. And the thing that I would say here is a lot of the kids that I work with who have ADHD and make these mistakes, they tend to swing the other direction and become kind of overly sensitive and cautious about their own behavior because they've made so many mistakes, right? And so we don't want them to go that direction either. So you have to kind of like walk that line. And one way you can do that is ask them, okay, so when your friend said that to you, what do you think about that? Do you think that's true? Is that something that you think would be helpful to work on, or is it something we should just not listen to and throw away? Because at times people are going to say things and you can kind of talk to them about, is that really helpful? Is that really true? No, probably not, because you have all this evidence that that's not true. So we can just throw that feedback away. But this other feedback, maybe that's helpful feedback because other people may have said that too. Or as a parent, you can say, I've actually noticed you doing that before too. So maybe that's something we could practice and work on. And then I think at home, you guys can also role play a little bit. And I know this gets awkward when they're teens. They don't want to necessarily do this, but they do want things to get better. And so I think that having you there to kind of help and give them tips and advice is really, really helpful. And you have to keep doing it, keep coaching them through these experiences. But then you were talking about taking it to the next level. And I think for kids that are really struggling, that's when the therapy can become a helpful thing. So therapists are trained to also work on social skills and how to interact appropriately and how to change your behaviors, right? And so getting a therapist involved at that point could be helpful to really focus on those social skills. And some of the groups that I mentioned earlier, that's part of the purpose of doing those kinds of groups, because they can learn and practice some of those skills in this safe, small group setting. And then they can hopefully go and take what they learned and practice that with their peers. But I think another part of it is just also to keep searching for their people, because a lot of the kids I work with, they may not find that group when they're in high school. They may leave high school and then they may get a part-time job. And all of a sudden they found a couple people at that job that they really connect with. And finally, they've got somebody that they can really, that they really feel like they can connect with. And so I think you just have to keep looking, keep encouraging them to try new things. If one thing doesn't go well, then try something else. And if you see that there's a connection, then really help support it, help invite that person over for dinner, plan get-togethers with the other person's family. Talk to them about how's their friendship going. Is there anything that's not going well? So I think it's just something we need to take seriously. And a lot of parents have this kind of as a lower priority. It's something that we just kind of feel like it's going to work itself out, but it doesn't always work itself out. Some kids really struggle with this, and it can really be impactful in the long term. So, okay.
Yeah, I think for sure, Lindsay, I think that it is big and it's hard. I mean, as a parent, it's hard to watch because you see every time that it happens, how hurtful it is to them. And it's, as a parent, you can't fix it, right? Like, it's not, there's a lot of things that we can try and it doesn't necessarily fix everything. So I think that I know as a parent, for me, that's been an ongoing thing since my child was really small and older now, and still, still something that in fact, we had a conversation about a fallout today about a friendship.
Gosh.
And so I know that it's the struggle is definitely real. So you're not alone. We do have something in the chat box is basically, when is outpatient hospitalization recommended? Comorbid conditions, depression, anxiety, self-harm tendencies, been in and out of the hospital, but still does self-harm, anxious, confused. So talk to us about the intensive. So there's basically, for those of you who don't know, that there's something called a PHP, that we love acronyms, partial hospitalization, and then there's the IOP,
intensive outpatient.
Intensive outpatient therapy. And so this is when you're basically doing this therapy, right, Lindsay? And you're doing your 50 minutes or your 45 minutes, and it's quite frankly just not enough. Right. Is that basically the answer of when PHP or IOP might be a good fit for a family?
Yes. Yeah. When the weekly sessions are just not enough, you're not making enough progress or fast enough progress. And when there's big concerns. So when there becomes safety concerns like self-harm, suicidal thoughts, then it's absolutely necessary, because weekly sessions are just not going to be appropriate for that. And IOP, intensive outpatient, would be something like, it's oftentimes like 3 days a week, or, it's a few days a week, and it's for a few hours each time. And it involves lots of groups. A lot of programs have a combination of groups as well as individual treatment. There's oftentimes medication management involved as well. So that would be an IOP. So it's kind of a step up from those just weekly outpatient visits. And then partial hospitalization is typically going to be that's a next step up. So spending a longer period of time at the hospital, but it's not full inpatient. That would be the next step after that. And so some of it is going to depend on assessment. So if your child or your teen is really struggling and they have some of those really big risk factors, then it's going to be necessary to take them to get them assessed. And then you don't have to be the one to decide which of these levels is most appropriate for them. The program itself, they can assess and determine where they would be the best fit. And sometimes they may need to do more than one. They may need to go through a partial hospitalization program, and then they may need to step down and do the IOP program for a little while before transitioning back out to ongoing outpatient therapy again. And we've even seen families that have done IOP more than once, or PHP more than once. So just because, I think it's just about meeting, where the child is. But I say get the intervention early, especially, if they're younger and they need the intervention, get the intervention early, because the teen years are coming. And they're coming with a vengeance. And so, very, very difficult, but and I would say, I have a lot of experience with IOP and PHP, and I know, Lindsay, you do, and I know you've researched a lot of programs. You guys can email Lindsay if you want to have a better understanding of what programs are available in and around our area. So she does have some knowledge on that, and she can kind of share the information on that. And as a parent that has gone through this, what I would say is evaluate the programs closely, because not all programs are created equally. And you may be going there because your child has anxiety, depression, ADHD, self-harm, or, any of the other things that were mentioned. And other people might be in the IOP program because they have anxiety, depression, and they're addicted to drugs, or there may be some other things. And your child may be going through that too, but there may be other things that your child would be exposed to that you might not want them. You might be thinking, oh, well, we have a lot of problems, but that isn't one of them, and we don't want that problem. So I say that it is important to look closely at like, who is their primary demographic, who are they serving, and what are the primary diagnoses of what they're serving is an important factor. Yes, I completely agree. And you can go there and visit, and if it's not what you are looking for, you do not have to sign them up. You can look into other programs. So, but the hope is for many of you that it will never get to that point. But if it does, there are these programs that are really helpful. I think thinking about preventing that, the key really is intervening early and knowing these things may come, knowing that they are at risk for developing some of those symptoms. So that's why we're talking a lot today about what to do to prevent things from getting to that point. And part of the reason for that is just because it is so common. We just see so many kids who in their teen years start to struggle with these issues. And right now, by the way, I have a whole other presentation on the impact of COVID on mental health in kids, but right now the rates of everything have gone way up. So the rates of suicide and self-harm, hospitalization in kids, depression, anxiety, everything has gone up during the past 2 years. And so if we take kids who already are at risk of that with ADHD, and then look at these other things that have happened over the past couple of years, then it puts them at even higher risk. So if you have not already set up a therapist for your child, it's just something to think about, because also right now, our clinic, as well as many others, have wait lists, and it takes a while to get in. And sometimes you may have to try a couple different therapists before you find one that you really like and your child connects with. So it's something to kind of think ahead about. I think a lot of parents kind of do it more of an emergency thing at the last minute, and it might be hard at that point to get in with a good therapist that you guys really would like. Okay, so moving on, the last point I just wanted to make is taking care of you, because this is a frustrating diagnosis to deal with, I know, for parents. And I think a big part of what can chip away at the self-esteem of our kids is our reaction. So we talked earlier about positive parenting was one of those predictors of success. And if you're not taking care of yourself and you are not being your best, then I think you are going to run the risk of shifting into some of those negative parenting strategies, the scolding, the criticizing, the arguing, the yelling. And that's really something that is going to impact their self-esteem in the long run. So I think it's really important to take care of yourself, be aware of your own needs when you are needing some self-care, or if you might need to reach out to a therapist personally. And another, I put in there, drown out the critics, because almost every parent I work with deals with this. They have other people who are judging and kind of telling them, you need to do this, you need to do that. And they don't know unless they're in your position, right? In your shoes. You guys know what it's like. You know your child better than anyone. So you really have to kind of learn to just drown out the noise and the critics, just nod and smile, but you don't have to take that information and really internalize it. And make sure you have a support system, which is part of why ADDA is here, so that we can all connect and we can talk about the same things that we're all going through. It helps a lot. It really is important what you say. This is part of the positive parenting. What you say matters. Your words matter. And these are 5 points I wanted to make real quick. One is try to critique the behavior, focus on the behavior, not the child. So rather than saying, you're so crazy, then instead say, your behavior is getting a little bit out of control right now. We might need to take some deep breaths and calm down a little bit. So try to focus and shift it away from the child to their behavior. And sometimes they will do that. They will use words labeling themselves and focusing on themselves. And you need to also help them to shift it to the behavior. I know that's something that my son does all the time, and I'm constantly helping him shift the way he phrases it to focus on the behavior, not himself as a person. And then when you're praising them, it's not enough just to say good job, because kids with ADHD really need it to be specific. That really helps. It has to be very clear and very specific. Sometimes they don't even hear when we said it. So get them to look you in the eye and say, I really like how you helped me put the dishes away right when I asked you to do it and you didn't complain. I'm really proud of you for doing that. So make it very clear, very specific, make sure they heard you, because that's going to then carry over and they're going to do it again. And they're also going to feel good about that. That's going to help with self-esteem. Another big thing is pointing out times that you see them struggling and they overcome whatever the struggle is. That's huge. And we don't want to let those opportunities pass by, because they may not even notice that they did that either. And we want to highlight it for them so that they are aware. We have to say, look what you did. That was a really hard project and you broke it down step by step, and you didn't think that you could do it, but you made it all the way through it. And you did such a good job. I'm so proud of you. So point that out to them, because then they'll kind of think about it and say, yeah, that's true. I didn't think I could do it, but I did do a good job. So the more we do that and point out those struggles and the overcoming of the struggles, it's kind of like we're building up evidence in their mind that they can do it. That perceived competence that I talked about earlier, it's helping to build that. And then show unconditional acceptance. So a lot of kids that I work with have, for some reason, have this sense that they're not good enough, right? Who they are is just not good enough. And maybe they've gotten that sense from just some of the negative comments they've heard, or the criticism or the scolding. But we need to show them that we love them no matter what. They can make a million mistakes and we still love them no matter what. We just are trying to guide them and teach them. So you have to kind of separate that out and make sure they understand that you unconditionally accept them and love them for who they are, because that will help them accept themselves. That's a big reason for that. And then the last one is try to flip and reframe ADHD, both for yourself and for your child. So try to think about it in a different way. It's always portrayed in such a negative light, but there's so much more research now showing that there's a lot of positives of having an ADHD brain. And if we can flip that around and try to highlight some of the positive things and try to de-emphasize some of the negatives, then it really makes a big difference in our overall way of thinking and our child's overall way of thinking. So this next slide kind of gives you some tips on how to do that. And I've even done this as an activity in therapy, where I've had kids write down all the words that people have said about them, all the negative words or things that they think about themselves that are negative. And we make a whole list of those things. And then we go through, and each one we try to see what is the flip side of that. What's another way to look at that might be more positive? So being easily distracted is kind of a negative thing, but maybe it's also because they're very curious, right? All of our kids are very curious. And that's not a bad thing to be curious. That's a predictor of success. And so each of these things we can flip around. Being forgetful, yes, that can be frustrating, but part of the reason they're forgetful is because they live in the moment and they're fully engaged in the moment. And many of us would love to have that ability to be fully engaged in the moment. That can actually be a great thing that we need to harness. So we could go through and talk about each one of these things, but you see what I mean, that we can just reframe the way we're thinking about it. And if we can do that as parents, then we can convey that to our kids. And sometimes that's even harder. We may get it. We may see the flip side, and we may see how incredible their brains are and what incredible kids they are and how much potential they have, but they may not see it. And that's something I know we work on all the time with my son, just on a daily basis, reframing, trying to help him see the flip side of it so that his brain isn't automatically going to the negative. And I think that it's just a constant effort, but it's something that it's going to pay off, I think, in the long run. So the last thing I wanted to point out is just some of the success stories. There's so many, and I just took a couple that I wanted to highlight, but you can see here, I like using this ADHD Wall of Fame. I've shown this to so many kids and they're fascinated by it because there's so many famous names on here, but these are people that either we know for sure had ADHD or they are believed to have had ADHD based on the historical information that we have. And this is people who are entrepreneurs, athletes, artists, musicians, inventors, political figures, writers, actors. So these are some of the people who are changing the world, right? And making a big impact on society. They're doing big things, and we need these people in our society. We need these kinds of thinkers and these ADHD brains. So I don't want everyone to get caught up in the negatives and the deficits. You know, even the title ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, using those terms deficit and disorder can sound very negative. and harsh. And it's been an uphill battle, but I think we all have to try to work on flipping the narrative and talking about this in a different way, because it absolutely can lead to lots of success. So here's the two examples I picked out. One is Michael Phelps. And I'm sure most of you know who he is, but just in case you don't, he's a retired Olympic swimmer. So he won 28 Olympic medals and 7 world records. He's kind of the epitome of success in his field. And what his mom was told when he was a child is, your son will never be able to focus on anything. So that's something that one of the teachers had told her when he was a kid. And he had made the comment that when he was a child, I simply couldn't sit still. He was very hyperactive. He was diagnosed with ADHD at 9 years old. And what they found was that swimming just became an outlet for his energy. His mom realized that when he swam, it was really helpful to him. It kind of calmed him. He was able to get through his homework, if he was able to get his energy out in the swimming pool. And he said that being in the pool actually slowed down his mind. And that's one reason he really liked swimming. So, and one thing his mom did that was very creative is she would use sports or use swimming to get him more engaged in school. In different ways. She would use it in some of the lessons he was learning. She would incorporate sports, or she would use it as an incentive that he could only go and do his swimming after he finished an assignment. So it really was helpful to him. And this quote, I think, says it all. He says, I look at myself every day and I'm so proud and so happy of who I am and who I was able to become. And he's very open about his ADHD diagnosis and the fact that his ADHD brain is what led to his success. It didn't interfere with his success. It actually led to it in the long term.
He's also been very open with like depression too, like with what he's struggled with, depression as well. So that is, there are a lot. I love that you're sharing the positive examples. And I remember one time that we had a talk before with you, and it really stuck with me. There's a lot of things that you've said in the past that have stuck with me, but talking about the superpowers, like again, it's always the negativity. But the reality is those superpowers are big. They are big. They have the staying power to still be standing when other people give up. There's so many things that are really good. But when we're in the trenches, right, like living sleeping and breathing, or not sleeping, or not not eating, some of the other things that go along with it, right? It's hard to be mindful of this, and also that the journey of parenting, it is a journey, and we do go through phases and stages with kids, just like we grew ourselves, right? And kind of all along the way, there's a lot of twists and turns, but like taking that time and to find that moment, like, because it's true as a parent, like, just being completely fluid and honest here. It's like, every day before 8 a.m., there's 100 things that have gone wrong, right? Like, so it's like, and so when we're hearing the message and we know that this message was right? It's right to find the things that they're doing right, to find the things that we can build on, to find their strengths, to find their activities and things like that. But when 100 things have, gone wrong and the wheels are off the bus and things are rolling backwards, and we're human beings, like, on the other side of it, we're tired, and we're working full-time jobs and full-time marriage and other kids and all the things that we balance as humans. It's really hard, but this message that you've given is just so timely and so right on. And I'm so thankful for this encouragement on that, for sure.
Good. I'm glad you feel that. I feel like I need it too. I think all of us, sometimes we need this reminder, right? And everything you said goes back to the self-care. As parents, we really need that. We need to sometimes focus on, how am I handling this situation? Do I need to step away to calm down a little bit? Do I need to be getting more sleep? Is that why I'm a little bit on edge? Because we really have to kind of be self-aware so that we can make sure that we are doing our best for them.
Every day trying to be on the A game. And I think too, also, I just wanted to say too, that coming together as parents, if you are married, coming together as parents, because the division is something that can definitely happen when there's a lot of upheaval in the household, not because of spouses, but because of the kids or whatever. So really trying to come together, who's good cop, who's bad cop, who's,
how are we going to handle this?
And how do we, even if maybe we don't agree, how do we present that united front? Because that's so important.
And yeah, exactly. And making sure that we both are being consistent about it. Because if one parent's doing one thing and the other is not, it's just not going to work as effectively, especially for kids with this type of brain. They need the consistency. So yeah, I think all of those are really good points. This other quick example is David Nielamen. So he's the founder of Blue Airways. And he's another person that's been very open about his ADHD diagnosis. And he really thinks that it's been a major reason for his success. And he says, my ADHD brain naturally searches for better ways of doing things. And he's talked about how the way his brain works has actually helped him to be more innovative and think outside the box. And I mentioned that earlier, the divergent thinking that comes with having an ADHD brain. He feels like that is what has led to his success with JetBlue Airways. And he came up with in-flight television. He's always thinking of other things outside the box, creative ideas. He said, I knew I had strengths that other people didn't have, and my parents reminded me of them when my teachers didn't see them. I thought that was a really important statement, because sometimes the negativity is not going to be coming from us. It's going to be coming from others. And we have to, at a minimum, be the ones to give them the encouragement and the support that they might not get elsewhere, right? And that's what happened for him. And that was something that helped predict his success. He also said it's been really helpful for him that he will surround himself with the people who manage the details. So one of those things I mentioned earlier when they interviewed all the adults that had ADHD, and they said as long as they can learn to manage some of those negative symptoms, then all their other strengths helped them. Well, that's what he did. He learned, and one of his ways of managing those negative symptoms was finding the people who could help with those things. So basically delegating the things he knew he wasn't going to do well. And I've talked to a lot of adults with ADHD who were successful, who did the same thing. They kind of delegated those responsibilities. They were self-aware enough to know that this is not my strength. So I'm going to give this task to someone else who does have that as a strength. And this last thing he said, if someone told me you could be normal, which we have to question the word normal, or you could continue to have your ADHD, I would take ADHD. So it feels like it's something that he's proud of, and that it led to his success rather than interfering with it. There's actually a lot of more and more helpful books right now coming out that are focusing more on the positive aspects of ADHD, those strengths and the predictors of success. And these are just a few good ones, but there's lots of others. And I definitely would encourage you, aside from just reading books about ADHD in general and learning more about it as a diagnosis, also look into some of these books, because they really just kind of shift the way that you think about it and might help you as a parent to think about it in a more positive way. And it's sometimes when we get caught up in the negative, then it's hard for us to see the positive in our child. So if we can kind of change our own mindset, then that's really helpful. So I just wanted to end with this quote, because I think this says a lot right here. This is the psychologist that I quoted earlier, who has ADHD herself and has done lots of research. So she said, after 2 years of research and writing, my primary conclusion was this: the stigmas that those with ADHD face for not fitting into the traditional system can be more harmful than the ADHD itself. Being supported and empowered to figure out one's own way is more predictive of success than the elimination of symptoms. So you see, this kind of summarizes everything we talked about. And I would agree with this statement 100% just in my own practice, because what I'm starting to see more and more in my therapy clients and in my testing clients is that the bigger issue is the fact that they are not feeling good about themselves, and their self-esteem is declining, and they're starting to get more anxious, and they're starting to have more depression symptoms. I'm more concerned and worried about that than the actual ADHD symptoms, because that's something we can work on, we can manage that. but we don't want to see them start to slide in those other ways. So that's where we have to, I think, start emphasizing more. So,
Lindsay, I was going to
yes.
say, I know that we're kind of at the end of the time,
Yep.
but I think like that feeling of that there's always hope, that there's always a way forward. Because what I've seen is like when a person believes that there's no hope left, everything I do is wrong, everything I do, I mess up. Every time I turn around, I'm always grounded. I don't have the privileges. I don't, like, they have nothing to work towards. So like that reward system of where it's lighting up their brain of, you know, how can I fix that? They're going to make impulsive decisions. They're going to make poor decisions, but how can I recover from that? Because it's not like indefinite. My life is ruined.
Right.
And so kind of finding that hope and that next, and it's not like, you know, bailing them out, but that there is a way forward, I think has certainly been important. So I know
Yes.
that we're out of time, and I don't know, is there any other slide at the end or not? I'm not sure if there's another one.
That was all.
Okay.
That was all.
So I would just like to say, Lindsay, thank you so much for taking your time to be with us. It's always a pleasure, and your topic is always so great and so encouraging for all of us. So definitely thank you for that. And then I just wanted to mention again for anybody that is interested in kind of joining that mothership of the ADDA organization, in our email with the slides, with the recording, there will be either a brochure or kind of a link of where you can join. So if you're wanting to join for your family, so you can kind of be linked up with some of the other conferences and other webinars and other things that are happening with that organization, I would say it's a $40 for the year well spent. So again, we're not pushers on that. You don't ever have to join. You can come to every single one of our meetings and never join the organization. But we're glad that you guys came tonight, glad that you spent an hour with us. And we hope that you know that you're not alone. And next month, we'll have another awesome topic that we hope will help you in your journey as well. So thanks so much, everyone. And thank you again, Lindsay. We hope to have you back again soon.
Thanks, Allison. Bye, everyone.
Take care.